Planning your Saturday night can be a bit of a bitch. How about we make rock, not war? Load up Toxic Radio every Saturday night for the heavy metal happy hour with the one and only Fishman.
I don't know how to put this, but I'm kind of a big deal.
There will be interviews, ticket giveaways, a little bit of banter with Toxic Mike, and of course great metal from the 80s all the way through today. Starts at 7 p.m., runs until Fish says it's over.
Get out.
Catch it only on Toxic Radio. Don't play it safe. Play it toxic. Once every generation, there comes an event that alters how we perceive our world. That changes our expectations of what is possible. This is not really one of those events. But hey, Toxic Radio has a brand new studio, and that fucking rocks. So join us in celebrating our excellent new home. Toxic Radio. Awesomer than ever before. What? That is so a word.
Enjoying all that Toxic Radio has to offer? Well, make sure you like and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Be the first to find out about ticket giveaways, amazing guests, awesome contests, and Toxic Radio events. Just search Toxic Radio Live, all one word, and press that little button. Every time you do, someone here at Toxic Radio will get their wings. Yay! Well, not really. Aww. But we will get a warm, fuzzy feeling in our tummies. But then again, that just might be the beer. Anyway, like and follow us, and we will see you out there on the interwebs.
Welcome to Paradelphia Radio. This is Rick Pruitt, once again here in the Toxic Studios, and we are back with a return engagement tonight. We are on episode 298, plowing full steam ahead towards our 300th episode in a couple weeks. And tonight we have, as I just said, a return guest, which we don't normally do this soon, but this is very, very interesting topic that we're going to talk about tonight. And we had such a great time with this guest last time he was on back in April. We brought him back again. We're talking about James Matlock. He is a research fellow with the Parapsychology Foundation in New York. He's worked at the American Society for Psychical Research in New York and the Rhine Research Center in Durham, North Carolina. Jim has published widely on reincarnation and related issues and is co-author with Erlander Haraldson on the book we are talking about tonight, I Saw a Light and Came Here, Children's Experiences of Reincarnation. Jim, welcome back to Paradelphia.
Well, thank you, Rick. I'm very glad to be back.
Very glad to have you. And, hopefully you're doing well. The whole COVID thing seems to be gone bye-bye here, so we can finally get back to a normal world, and I'm sure that helps you with all the research you do.
Well, it does. It means I can more easily and actually interview people in person.
Which is always helpful. Again, like I mentioned a minute ago, this topic, it's interesting for one thing, but it's also universally relevant, because if reincarnation is a real event that happens to us all, then it happens to us all. Then it affects literally everybody in the world. So is this something that you are finding is gaining more traction in mainstream society? This idea?
Well, it does seem to. Yeah, the idea. It does seem to be, at least in mainstream culture. Now, scientific society, academia, it's taking a little bit longer. But there too, I've noticed a real change over the last 15 years, even.
Yeah, yeah, and it seems to be something that is really just kind of, at least, and maybe I'm just biased because I've been looking into this so much for the shows that we've done, but it just seems like it's taken off in more mainstream society recently. It used to be when I was a kid, this was something that was thought of as a crazy belief that they had in like India, in the Far East, and
Right.
it wasn't.
Right.
It had nothing to do with us. It was almost like believing in the tooth fairy. But
That's right.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to elaborate on that. I think social media have a lot to do with that. I think social media, Twitter, Facebook, all the rest of them, have made it possible for us to share these experiences. I think people have always had them. Ian Stevenson, who is the pioneer of this research, started back in 1960, found the same thing. That in West, he was hearing about a lot of these cases in the United States and Europe. And he realized even then that these experiences are much more common than people realize.
Right.
But back then people just did not talk about them. They did not share them. But it's become much easier now. And as more people become comfortable with sharing them, more people hear from their friends, and then they share their stories, and it sort of snowballs like that.
Yeah, and it seems like that's kind of the way with the topics we have on this show, whether it be UFOs or past life experiences or ghost apparitions or whatever. The more people talk about it, the more everyone else goes, "Oh yeah, I had that experience too."
I had that experience too, right?
Right, and now I'm willing to talk about it because you're willing to talk about it, and before you know it, the whole world is talking about it, and everybody's like, "Oh, yeah, I guess we all had that experience." Had that experience, So it's just one of those things where it's kind of always been there, but it's really been just the whole social taboo that's kept it under wraps.
Right, and I think that really is a lot of it. Whereas in Asia, I don't know that these cases are necessarily more common than they are in the West. Now, the stronger ones are.
Mm-hmm.
It is easier to find really good, strong, evidentially strong. When I say strong, I mean phenomenologically strong, and because of that, evidentially strong cases in Asia than it is in the West. They occur here but they occur here too in the United States and in Europe. They occur here also.
Do you think that has anything to do with the belief? Do you think that has anything to do with the belief they have in it, the strength of it?
Yeah, I think there's a very definite feedback there. First of all, I think if we look back over time, it seems logical that the belief in reincarnation would have originated in observations of these very things, right? Of hearing children talk about previous lives. And along with that goes children's behaviors, which suggest that they were the people they're talking about. Physical things, I'm not talking about just their faces look similar, which a lot of people seem to be aware of now. But birthmarks, which many people are aware of too, or other physical things, even diseases, can carry over from life to another. We can get into why that is, but in tribal societies, small scale societies, which is how human culture started, really, right?
Yeah.
I don't, that's not controversial. We know that. It would have been much easier to see people returning in the society. And in the tribal societies that are studied today, we see the majority of reincarnation cases are within the culture, and usually within the family lines, and usually within a generation or two. And when you have that, you have the possibility then of recognizing these signs quite easily. So I believe that the belief then originated in the signs. And you see, in cases where the belief takes root, you continue to have these cases, and the cases then help maintain the belief.
Right. And you talk about the strength. You talk about the strength of some of these cases, especially in the Middle East or in the in the Far East, and coincidence only goes so far. And we'll get into a little bit of this later on. We'll talk about some specific cases, but there are some there are some cases that I read in these books that just, I mean, there's just no way that 3, 4,
Yeah.
5-year-old kids could have this level of depth of information about the lives of somebody living 50 miles away or 100 miles away or whatever. Um, it's just impossible. I don't know how you would possibly
Yeah.
explain it.
And some of the kids are even younger than that.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of most of the kids start talking about these previous lives between the ages of 2 and 3.
Yeah.
And some, the very first things they say, it turns out in retrospect, had some sort of reference. I mean, yeah, I mean, we're talking about really young kids here.
Right. So the title of your book, I Saw a Light and Came Here. What is the relevance of that title?
That came from a case, actually, a case that my co-author Erlinda Harrelson investigated in Sri Lanka, and it's an interesting case. It was a girl uh, who recalled having been a male, so it's a sex change case, incense maker, and uh, so he, in order to get his wares to his buyers, he would take them on his bicycle. And there was one day he was out on his bicycle, and he was hit by a bus and actually run over by this bus.
Mhm.
And she recalled that. She recalled, the fatal, the bicycle ride and the being hit by the bus. And she also had birthmarks across her chest where the bus had transversed her body, broken several ribs, and so forth. But she said she also remembered dying, and she said that after her death, that she was around there, she saw the scene, and then she said, "I saw a light, and I came here." In other words, she was reborn. It wasn't like, I saw a light in near-death experiences. We also
Right.
hear about the light, but people go into the light and so forth. She didn't
Mhm.
say she went into the light. She said, "I saw a light, and came here." That's where the
So
time.
it was almost like an instantaneous rebirth. There was no like between time or anything like that.
Well, there was. As a matter of fact, I mean, there was, for her, in her experience, there was not. It was condensed in that way. But there, I don't
Okay.
remember the number of years, but it was a few years.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Not many years, but a few years. But it was condensed in her experience. Yeah.
Okay. Now you mentioned how the kids start talking about this around the age of 2 up to maybe the age of 6 or 7 or so.
Yeah.
And it
Yeah.
makes sense. I mean, at the age of 2, most children are putting sentences together into coherent sentences and expressing themselves. But is there anything about the physiology of the child's brain at that age, that 2 to 6 year old range, that makes it more conducive to recalling these past life events? Has there ever been any kind of research done about that?
Yeah, huh. No, not yet. I mean, in terms of the research,
Yeah.
and it would be a really good thing to look at. I mean, one can certainly speculate that. I mean, mainstream memory researchers don't even credit children that young with having the capacity to make memories, store memories in the brain, because they assume that memories are in the brain, right?
Right.
And they look at, how developed the children's brains are, and they say, "Oh, this is just impossible."
Right.
Uh, and so, but it's during that period where supposedly, according to the mainstream memory researchers, that encoding is the term they like to use, memories is impossible, that these memories tend to start. So, I mean, among many other things, having memories like this does suggest that memory doesn't reside in the brain, right? It
Yeah.
has to reside somewhere else. But there's also the question of then memory retrieval, right? And how the brain is related to memory retrieval. And it may be that as the brain becomes more developed, it makes that retrieval more difficult,
Mm.
right? And so that's why you find the very young children, uh, you know, coming out with these things, because they don't have, their brains don't have to,
Yeah.
or they're not putting up so many blocks.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
So
I know in co- in college I was that the liberal arts kid that took 1,000 classes, and one of the classes I took was child development. And I don't remember a whole lot from
Yeah.
that class, but I do remember them talking about how children's brains developed over time. And
Right.
it sort of makes sense that if this is the age when these memories happen and then they kind of just fade away for the most part, that there may be some kind of a chemical component or a physiological component that allows
It does.
this particular memory or memories to flood through for a while.
It
That
does. And we used to think, that between the ages of 5 and 8, the memories tend to fade. That's it. But my Erlander, again, my co-author for this book,
Mhm.
he did studies. He actually went out and did studies of memory retention, past life memory retention. And what he found in both Sri Lanka and Lebanon, which were the countries that he worked in most, he did these studies there. He found when he went back and re-interviewed in young adulthood, or in some of them, middle adulthood, people who, as children, had reported these memories. Many of them still had memories, so they can be retained. We now know, we now realize, well past that age of 8 or so.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting. It's almost like they
Yeah.
remember the memories that they had, but as far as I know, they don't bring any new ones beyond a certain age.
Well,
Unless you,
that's an interesting.
yeah, I was saying unless you can tell me different. I mean, I'm sure I'm wrong about a lot of this
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah. Well, we don't, we need more longitudinal studies like this to really get a good handle on it. But one of the things that Erlander found in these studies, these follow-up studies,
Mhm.
is that occasionally the young adults or the adults, uh, say some of them were middle aged, um, reported memories of things that they had not talked about when they were kids. Now, had those just not been reported to the researchers, or were they newly developed memories? We don't really know. But my daughter is one of these kids,
Mm.
um, and she talked about her memories when she was 3, and she retained them until she was 12. Then they faded. But when she was 11, I I need to say a little bit more about this because uh, she stopped talking about them after a few months at 3. When she was 3, she would come every few weeks, um, to me. She'd come from playing and say, "I want to tell you a story about myself." And this is typical. These kids talk in first person about their memories. They really relate to the people.
Mhm.
So she would tell me a story about herself because she had, I would listen to her. I was interested and showed I was interested in this. Um, and this went on for several months, but then it stopped. And I didn't press at that point. I thought this is just natural fading. But then when she was 11, 11-year-old, you can, I didn't feel like I was, doing anything, anyway, I
Coaching or whatever.
asked her, yeah, coach, yeah, whatever, in encouraging memories that want to fade on their own. You kind of want to avoid that as a parent because,
Right.
the um, there's this tension between what a researcher wants and what a parent wants.
Yeah.
Because it's not clear that it's really good for many children or adults either to have these memories unless they come spontaneously, and then that's different. But to encourage them, so I let the matter drop. But I asked her at 11, and at 11 she told me she still had memories. In fact, she then reported some memories. This is where I'm getting to the answer to this question here. Um, some memories that she had not mentioned to me when she was younger. So it is possible to have uh, memories later on. But yeah, most of the memories uh, they do have in the early years, and then they may or may not retain them after
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, skeptics, they'll claim, and we touched on this a second ago. Skeptics will claim that children are being coached or prodded by parents that maybe
Yeah.
want them to have these past life memories just because it's interesting, because they want to have a story to tell at dinner parties or what, maybe get into a book like yours or something like that. Um,
Yeah.
what would you say to skeptics that just say, "Oh man, this is just their kids being coached up"?
Right. Well, if that's what you believe, you have to explain why a lot of these kids come out with things about people their parents don't know, about people who maybe lived decades before in another part of the country that are verified that are true.
Yeah,
How do they know that? Where do they come
yeah,
from?
yeah. Like I mentioned earlier, some of these cases in the book are just are crazy as far as the relevance and the veracity of the statements made by like a 2 or 3 year old.
Yeah.
And yeah, and even if it was, see, my thing is, even if the parents were coaching them, that's a pretty smart kid at 2 or 3 to withhold that, to grasp that information and then regurgitate that information in such a way that
Right.
it's point for point what the parent told them. That's a genius level 2 or 3 year old.
And not only that, but to personate the child too, right?
Yeah,
In their behaviors, to take on that personality, to somehow, take whatever the parents are coaching them, and the acting skills this would take. I mean, it's
yeah,
just
right,
incredible.
right. So we mentioned how kids, as they get older, they retain memories for a while and then they kind of fade away. Have you noticed that children or young adults tend to be traumatized in any way by these past life
Yeah.
memories?
Yeah, it can be. I mean, and this is one of the reasons why, a parent should not encourage these memories in the children. If they come up spontaneously, don't put them down, and allow them to air them. They probably, they need to talk about it, and it's not good to dismiss it. But yeah, I mean, children who experience violent deaths. Uh, Very often, I mean, many of these kids, I mean, they recall, worse than being run over by a bus. I mean, they remember being murdered and all sorts of
Right.
grotesque things. And yeah, they're traumatized by this. In fact, it's sort of interesting. I mean, Erlander again, he likened this to post-traumatic stress disorder type symptoms, and it really is that.
Mhm.
Uh, but what's interesting about that is that these are the sorts of things, sorts of reactions you would expect had the person lived, but they didn't live, they died. And here is the child recalling them,
Right.
going through this process. And, it can take several years to play out, just as PTSD can take to work itself out, in the
Yeah.
same life.
Yeah. I often wonder about adult. I mean, my wife, take her for example. She is deathly afraid of snakes. Deathly afraid of snakes. And as
Yeah,
far as I know, she's not had an experience with direct experience with snakes since I've known her, and I
yeah,
don't think in her entire life before that. But she is deathly afraid of
right,
snakes. And I always want, like, I
right,
joke about it with her sometimes. I'm like, this must be a past life thing. Like, were you bitten by a
right.
snake and died in a
Well,
past life? Like, but I say it jokingly, but I'm really not joking. Like, I really think that
yeah.
may be what's going on here.
Yeah, yeah, maybe that's what's going on here, because that's another whole class. It's not just the PTSD type symptoms; it's also the phobias.
Yeah,
Um, Phobias turn up in a lot of these cases, and and they're associated with the way that people died, or where they died, or the people who killed them, and so forth. There's an Indian boy who whose throat was slit
mm.
uh, by relatives, actually. A barber and a washerman. Um, and he was afraid of all barbers and washermen. He generalized that sort of fear. He
Oh wow.
recalled this. He also had a mark across his neck where his head had been cut
Yeah,
almost off. So yeah, I mean, you can't be sure uh, that that things like that are not going to be recalled. They're not going
yeah.
to carry over and influence the next life.
That's a very specific fear to be afraid of
Yeah.
a barber, or,
Eh,
Um. So
eh,
how about
And for that,
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
no, you go ahead. It's time for the next question. Go
I
ahead.
was gonna I was gonna mention reincarnating within families. I've heard of this happening. How often does this happen? Do you think?
It happens fairly often, but it's interesting. It's also cross-culturally variable. There's some societies that have it much more common than others. Um, like for India, for instance, I think it's only 12% of cases are same family cases. In these tribal cultures that I was talking about earlier, where the expectation is to be reborn within the clan, the lineage, almost all cases have family connections. Maybe not immediate family. I'm not talking about immediate family here, although very young children do tend to be born to the same parents. I'm talking about, grandparents or great uncles or whatever, but coming back as a relative. It's
Right.
fairly common.
Yeah.
I don't know, 20% of cases probably.
So I know in talking to these people in these cases, I'm sure you get a lot of information about what happened between lives. And I've heard with past life regressions, people talking about how there's a certain amount of control that we have over choosing when to come back, how to come back, who to come back to, what family to come back to.
Right, right.
Have you come across much of that in your research, and how much control do you think, based on your research, that we actually do have?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Very interesting question too, because yes, we do in these we call them these spontaneous cases as opposed to the regression ones, where you have involuntary memories and so forth. In about 20% of the cases, children, typically we are talking about children here, recall events, during the intermission, as we call it, the intermission between lives.
Hmm.
Um, but uh, the way that kids talk about them in these spontaneous cases is very different than what you get in some of these regression accounts from Michael Newton, for instance,
Yeah,
or Dolores Cannon. Very different.
yeah.
So they have there is a structure, but it's a different structure. I mean, there's no talk about debriefings after death, or going and being with soulmates and this type of thing.
Hmm.
Um, and there's no life planning either before birth. People don't make plans for their next life and so forth. Um, uh, but there are commonalities, and the structure is quite similar to a near-death experience. The difference being, in a near-death experience, there's a return to the body, whereas in a reincarnation experience, the same sorts of figures that will say, your time hasn't come, and send you back to the body in an NPE, will say, come with me, and escort them on. They'll recall this. The kids will recall this.
Hmm.
Same sorts of figures.
Interesting.
Um, and they'll talk about meeting other spirits during the intermission, and they will talk also about how they chose their parents. Okay, and that's quite common. However, they do not talk about any planning beyond that, and they don't talk about sort of foreseeing what life is going to be like with these parents. They're just drawn to them. And even if even if it was a stranger to their previous in the previous life,
Hmm.
even if it's somebody they become aware of only during the intermission period, because this is something else quite important that we get with these spontaneous cases that you do not get at all in regressions. You don't hear about at all, and that is perceptions. There are many of these kids report perceptions of the material world, perceptions of their parents, which turn out to be accurate. Veridical is the term. Accurate. These things really happen that they talk
Hmm.
about. And so there's one case. Many of your listeners will know of this case. James Leninger is the American boy who recalled being shot down in the Pacific, not far from Hiroshima. It was a different Iwo, closer to Japan, but anyway, in that area, and then was reborn. He actually was born in San Francisco, but he claimed to have met his parents on a vacation in Hawaii, and described the hotel they stayed in and the dinner they had on the beach. In fact, his parents were in Hawaii shortly before that, a few months before he was conceived and born. So he wasn't conceived there, but he saw them there, and so the suggestion is, he tagged along with them, and later, at the appropriate time, he he joined the body.
It's
But anyway, the point is that there are many cases like this where the children talk about having seen parents during the intermission and describe things that actually happened,
yeah.
right? And so, he had no relationship to his parents, right? They were strangers to him, complete strangers.
Hmm.
And he died several decades before that, and yet he saw this. He was to them, and he made this connection, right? So the connection can be made to the parents during the intermission. It doesn't have to be just returned to the family. But we don't see anything beyond that. We don't see any life planning beyond.
Yeah, it's almost like a vetting process. Like you look around, see what choices are out there, kind of follow some around, and like scouting a football player in college or something. Do you want them on your team?
Yeah.
Is this going to be your team or no?
Yeah, but it's a vetting process with a decision made viscerally,
Yeah.
on an emotional level, not through, okay, I can see the future. I know what kind of life I'm going to get into these parents. I know how my life is going to work out. I know what kind of people they are. No, none of that. It's just, I like this person, you know. There's one case, it's a European case. This is an older one.
Hmm.
But anyway, it's an interesting one still. Um, a, um, a child said that he that um, that during the intermission, um, he was sometimes these spirits are what I call assisting spirits. They help in some way. Um, to determine the next birth. And one of the ways the assisting spirits may help is to give options. Instead, he was given an option of different people. And one of the things that he was shown was a man, a boy, a youth, a teenager, I believe he was, who in school, in a school concert, he was playing a violin. The violin strings broke, but he continued to act as if he was playing his violin. And he was this he said drew him to his father. He decided then he wanted to be his father. Now this was long before his father met his mother, and yet so again, the suggestion is he picked him out, he stayed with him, he followed him, and then when the time was right, he got himself reborn.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's just it's like I said, a visceral thing. I mean, it's just an emotional thing.
Yeah, and
It's
which is
raw.
interesting. Which is interesting. It's not hardly ever. If I don't think I've ever heard a case where it's been anything materialistic, where they say, "Oh, I'm going to go with this family because they've got money or whatever." It's always
Right.
like you say. It's a more visceral, more emotional thing where they just kind of just feel like that's who they belong with or who they need to
That's
be
right.
with.
That's right. And this is so different from what you get in the regression accounts.
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely interesting. Now you mentioned birthmarks a little while ago. The story of the girl that had the birthmark of I think it was tire tracks or something across her chest.
Right.
This is something that's fairly prevalent in this past life studies as well. Is having birthmarks. Do you think every birthmark is relevant to a past life, or is it just some?
No.
Or
No. Just some. Yeah, no, birthmarks can have many causes, and we know that. I mean, some are genetic, some are caused by things that go on in the womb. I mean, so no, by no means all birthmarks are past life related, but a good number of them are. And the ones that are have some interesting characteristics that set them apart from birthmarks. For instance, the most common kinds of birthmarks, like angel kisses and other things like that, never show up in these cases.
Hmm.
The birthmarks in reincarnation cases, however, are all unusual types of birthmarks. They are unusually large. They're unusually shaped. They're often shaped like the wound, or like the boy that I mentioned had his throat slit. He had a linear mark across his neck.
Mhm.
The girl who was run over by the bus. She had large uh, uh, birthmark covering her chest in the area. Erlander got her autopsy report. I mean, the autopsy report showed, where the bus, the damage the bus did to the body lines
Right.
up. So in location and appearance, the birthmarks are very close. Now, they mean exact. I mean, you have to allow for the fact that usually you're talking about adult, who is killed, and then you're looking for the birthmark then on an infant. Obviously it's not going to be the same. And yet, if you look if you think in terms of, anatomical landmarks and things in that way, yeah, the concordance is remarkable.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very, very interesting. So, what do you think that reincarnation tells us about consciousness?
What does it tell us about consciousness? Well, I think it tells us quite a lot. Um, it, when people first about reincarnation and think about what it is that reincarnates, the answer is always the soul, right? The soul is what reincarnates. Well, I puzzled about this for a long time. I mean, what's the soul, though? I mean, what is the soul?
Mm-hmm.
And what I finally realized is that if we think of the soul being basically the mind, I mean, in the word psyche, the Greek word psyche, as something between what we mean by mind, what we mean by soul. So the idea of a sort of a crossover or linkage there is not new at all. So if we think of what reincarnates as being consciousness, a stream of consciousness, that's continued with embodied life, and we think of the soul that way, I think we move the whole concept away from simply a religious idea into something we can begin to make sense of scientifically.
Right.
So I think what it tells us is that consciousness, first of all, is not generated by the brain like many materialists think.
Mm-hmm.
That consciousness is separate. I mean, it obviously it interacts with the brain. Obviously, there's a dynamic there. But it's separate from the brain. I think that's one of the things that it suggests. And it also suggests to me, anyway, that consciousness leads to the subconscious, because I think we need to keep in mind always that consciousness is not just the awareness level of consciousness, right? It's also our subconscious,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, we're all aware, of our subconscious, right? We have one. We know that just as much as we're aware that we have that they have more conscious awareness part of it. And so I think of memories, and not just memories of events, but also memories of personality traits and memories of behavior, sorts of things are recorded in our subconscious. So when um, when we die, our consciousness is freed from our body, right? And it continues on both levels of consciousness, right? The awareness part, which is the part that sees things, and then the subconscious part, which is the part in which all this information is carried forward. And then at reincarnation, what happens, I believe, is the consciousness then becomes associated. We say reincarnated is a term we like to use in the new body. It becomes associated with the new body, and at that point, because all of this is in the subconscious, it's just a question of how and when we bring it up from the subconscious into our conscious awareness, or how it can affect us, because these things can still affect us in a subconscious way, an unconscious way, without us being aware of it.
Right.
But so that's did I answer your question? I mean, that's
Yeah.
how I think of all this,
Yeah.
and
I mean,
I think it's a really important issue.
yeah. No, I agree. I agree with what you're saying there. So as far as going forward, what do you think has to happen to push the ball forward, so to speak, in this topic? What gets past life experience more accepted by more people to the point where it is something that is just assumed to be the case versus this constant battle to prove that these things actually happen? What moves that ball
Yeah.
forward?
Well, we're really talking about two things here. One on a cultural level, and another on a scientific level. And uh, I think just on a cultural level that we're so gradually there, with people becoming more aware of these that these experiences are, and as they become more accepting of them and more aware of the research, because that's a big part of it. Right now, still the best known things are Michael Newton's books and Edgar Cayce and all of this. But the research, the serious research, is becoming better known. That's why I like to go on shows like this and talk about it. Because, and I have a Facebook group, and why I write my books and so forth, because I want to put this stuff out there. It's been going on now for 60 years. And C.M. Stevenson started in the early 1960s. And we have a lot of research now. We have a lot of data. But it needs to become better known. But as it gets out there and people become comfortable with it, and as they share more of these stories, they realize more and more, well, the received scientific opinion can't be right on this. I mean, and this, you don't have to be religious, to get to this point. You can, there's plenty of data here. I mean, if you start looking into these cases and you start looking into this research, get to the point where, this isn't a belief anymore. I mean, it's a conclusion that you can draw on the basis of the data.
Yeah.
To me, it's just the only intellectually honest solution anymore is that reincarnation does occur, because there is no satisfactory way of explaining the wealth of the data that we have.
Right. Now, speaking of getting, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. No. Yeah. I wanted to. Yeah. Now that's on the culture side. On what has to happen on the scientific side now. I think we have a lot of these cases, right? And we've studied them long enough to see a lot of case patterns. Okay, that's the second stage in a science. You collect data, right? Because not all sciences are laboratory based, right? Botany isn't, astronomy isn't, and so forth. Right. So you start with observational data, right? And then you systemize that, and you look for patterns. Okay, and then you need to develop, and that's the stage we're at now. We're beginning to develop theory, and that's when the book, we more so than the book we're talking about the day I saw a light and came here. The book we talked about last time was about theory, because I think that's very important. And then once we have theory, then we can take the step and that derive some hypotheses. And these hypotheses can be ones that we test. I mean, that we can come up with, if we have a good solid theory of how reincarnation works, it should be possible to develop hypotheses that we can actually take into the laboratory and test. For instance, one thing that we could easily look at is to see in these birthmark cases. one of the weird things with gunshot cases, there were often two birthmarks, one on the chest, let's say if somebody shot in the chest, and one on the back, one matching the entrance and one matching the exit wound. Wow, wouldn't it be interesting if there's also an internal birthmark, that is the path through the body? We can investigate, right?
Right.
I mean, we could analyze that and actually go and see whether that's, and things like that. So a lot of things we can do about that. Also, a lot of things with memory. We can look and we can see whether children who have past life memories, whether their brain is acting more like with this life or this life imagination and fantasy. We can do that. Yeah. So there are a lot of things that we can do that will move it more towards a traditional type of science.
Yeah.
And that sort of work is what's going to be required to make scientists take notice. Another thing that has to happen in order for scientists to take notice is that materialism, which is already being questioned on many fronts, has to continue to be weakened. As long as mainstream scientists insist on viewing consciousness as generated by the brain and everything being material, then there's no possibility of any survival of death and reincarnation. I mean, they're just out of hand. You just dismiss it all.
Right.
So that has to happen too.
Yeah. So speaking of getting the word out there, where can people go to see your works, your books? You mentioned the Facebook page. Where can people get a hold of all the research and the things that you're doing with regard to reincarnation cases?
Yeah, thank you. With the Facebook group. Well, first of all, they're my books. This I Saw the Light and Came Here, which I wrote with Erland Harrelson, and then my other book, which is called Signs of Reincarnation, which is a title I really like that Signs of Reincarnation title, and it's also the name of my Facebook group, Signs of Reincarnation. If you're on Facebook, we're up to almost 17,000 members now. So we're and we try to make it sort of an educational group, right?
Yeah.
Where people can get in and talk about these experiences and learn about the research, and we try to guide people away from the New Age sort of understanding of reincarnation.
Right.
So that's a good resource there. There's also my website, which is jamesgmatlock.com, and I have I have links on there to the various things I've written, to my books, and also to the course that I teach. Did mention? I don't remember if we mentioned that earlier or not, but I also teach a course, an online course, and my Signs of Reincarnation. It's called Signs of Reincarnation, and my Signs of Reincarnation book is the textbook for that course. It's based on course lectures in previous years, and now that I have a book, it's the textbook.
Right. Okay.
So those would be the main things.
All right. Well, we're going to definitely link to all that stuff in our show notes, and people will be able to go through the podcast app and or whatever app they get their podcast on and get that information directly from us. So Jim, I want to thank you again for coming on tonight. It's a couple times in 2 months, but like I said at the beginning, I love having you on. I love talking about this topic. You are definitely an awesome source of information for this research.
Thank you.
And
thank you.
I wish you the best, and the next time you have another book on the way, or you come up with any kind of new research, please let me know, and we'll do this all over again.
All right, wonderful. Yeah, no, I'm delighted to do it. As I say, part of my mission is to get the word out. So I thank you for having me again.
Not a problem. All right, it's James Matlock. He is the author or co-author of Saw a Light and Came Here, and also Signs of Reincarnation. And again, like I said, we're going to have those on our show notes, so all you guys can pull those books off of our show notes coming this weekend. So again, Jim, thank you again, and you have a good evening.
All right, thanks, Rick. Yeah,
right.
Good to be with you again. Bye.
Take care. Thank you. All right, so that was, again, Jim Matlock, author and researcher of reincarnation, various aspects of it. He did some research on children's experiences, as well as he mentioned, Signs of Reincarnation, which is the name of the Facebook group, as well as his first book. This is a topic that I come back to this topic fairly often on the show. Because it's, like I mentioned a few minutes ago, it's just so fascinating, and it's relevant to everybody, and it's kind of, people have been talking recently about UFOs and how the reason the government is now coming out with this information about UFOs is because the amount of material, the amount of sightings, the amount of people coming forward saying this happened is just overwhelming, and you can't. It's like a tidal wave. You can't deny it anymore. It's not necessarily aliens from Zeta Reticuli landing on the front lawn, but it's something, and they have to acknowledge that it's something weird going on. And this is sort of the same thing. There's so many cases of reincarnation, and the cases are so compelling, so convincing when you read through them. When you have 3-4-year-old children, maybe children even younger than that, talking about people that they, by all rights, shouldn't know. And not just talking about these people, like talking about these intimate aspects of these people's lives and saying, yeah, I was your father, I was your daughter, I was your husband, whatever. And here's 10 different facts about our life together to prove it. This is a 2-year-old, 3-year-old talking now to somebody that they shouldn't know, that lived 100 miles away. I don't know anything about people living 100, like some random person living 100 miles away, the intimate aspects of their marriage or their life. I don't know these things. I don't know many people that would. But yet these little children, of all things, have, and that's the other thing too, is it seems to be almost an obsession with these kids to get this information out. It's kind of like it's inside them and they need to get it out. When I was 2 and 3, man, I was watching cartoons. I wasn't worried about, some aspect of some person's life 100 miles away, blah, 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 what they had, what they liked to eat for breakfast and what they did with their old car in 1952 or whatever, these facts that these kids come up with. I mean, you have to wonder. You read these cases and you read through the facts. And I honestly don't know how you could possibly read these cases and not come away thinking, man, there's something here. There's something going on. If it's not direct reincarnation, if it's not what Jim and other people are claiming, then it's something. And I'll be damned if I know what that something might be if it's not reincarnation. Your guess is as good as mine. Black magic? I don't know. Wizardry? You got a 2-year-old wizard out there who's pulling conjuring information out of the ether. I don't know, but it's something. And I haven't heard a better explanation than reincarnation. And the other thing is that this is not a new belief. This has been since the dawn of mankind. People have believed this. We're just kind of catching up to everybody else now. But but this is not a new concept. This is something that many, many, many generations and many different cultures have accepted as just reality. It's, like we accept, the grass is green and the sky is blue. They accept that this happens. And there's no question in their mind. Why? This is not a modern, hey, look at me, I'm going to write a book about this interesting topic. I'm going to tweet about it. I'm going to have a TV show. I'm going to get a TV show by talking about it. This is thousands of years ago, thousands and thousands of years ago. There was none of that, obviously. So why did these people believe these things? So, again, you have to ask yourself these questions, and then if you come away after asking yourself these questions and seeing these stories, seeing the facts and the detail of these accounts that these kids are coming up with, man, I don't know. If you got some other explanation, I'd love to hear it. I don't know. But yeah, so that's why I bring it up. That's why we talk about it on this show. And that's why I've had Jim Matlock on twice in the last 3 months. I guess it's been 2 or 3 months. Because his books are really interesting. Again, if you want to dig into this topic some more, you could find a lot worse places to go than these 2 books here. Because Signs of Reincarnation talks all about as it says, the signs that you get when one of these cases is present. And this book on children's experiences, I Saw a Light and Came Here. Again, these are really compelling cases, and the people telling these stories are 3-4 years old. So again, how do you explain that? All right, so we're going to wrap things up here for the evening. I want to thank Jim Matlock for coming on, and we are, again, going to put all his social media and links to his books in our show notes. And so next week, we are going to be back with show number 299, and I know next week part of the show is going to involve having our buddy Dash Daring back on the show. Dash is the roving reporter extraordinaire for Blobfest, which is fast approaching here, July 9th through the 11th, I believe. Open up in Phoenixville, PA. Well, that's where the Colonial Theater is, but it's actually a virtual event this year. So thecolonialtheater.com. You can go there now and you can purchase tickets. They are on sale. $25 gets you a link where you can have the festivities streamed over the interwebs for the entire weekend. So it's a pretty good deal. All right, so we're going to talk to Dash next week, and then the week after that, if all goes well, if we don't have any kind of interruptions, we'll have our big 300, our big 300th episode. All right, so for Toxic Mike, for Jamie, for myself, I am Rick. We are Paradelphia, and we are out of here.